Yo, welcome back to God Power Channel. We're about to unlock the God Power laying dormant inside of you. You know what I'm saying? But today what we're doing is we're focusing on Galatians, a book from the Bible. And the reason why we're focusing on this is because in order to unlock the God Power, you got to have a foundation. And for me, I found the strongest foundation was God. So, in order to understand God, or at least get a grasp on, what God could do, and what God power is, we had to understand what he wrote down. So the word. So we're breaking down the Bible, the book of Galatians, just to understand it to a deeper level. I think this is the best starting point if you want to understand the Bible at all. So last time we covered chapter 1, and we talked about how Paul is writing the letter. This time we're going to go ahead and get into chapter 2. So hopefully you did watch the last video. If you didn't, I'll put a link in the description so you can go watch that one. But it's in chronological order. So I'm doing it through chapters. So this is chapter 2 breakdown. If you like what you're hearing, please click like on the video and subscribe so you can hear more content, more God power content. Because we are going to move into a lot of good content about how to unlock your God power. But with no further ado, let's break down chapter 2. So chapter 2. So Paul is about to go preach his message, and first he wants to go to meet the leaders in Jerusalem just to make sure that his message is aligned with their message. So he took Barnabas and Titus, which are two other disciples. He took them with him to go meet the leaders and present the gospel which he was speaking to the Gentiles. On his way while he's preaching, like the Judaizers, the people who he's writing the letter against, the Pharisees, the people who don't like the freedom that he has in Christ, they actually sent spies on him to go spy on how he has this kind of freedom in God, and they were trying to throw him off his message, and that's crazy. That's crazy because that really happens in life. You know, if you're doing really, really well, people are going to be spying on you, and they're going to be trying to figure out how are you doing that well and why. Like, or is there a way I could throw you off so that I could be better? Like crab in the bucket mentality. Exactly what happened here with Paul. But number 5, verse 5 is where he kind of explains, how he dealt with that, which I thought was dope. He says, "We did not give in to them for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel may be preserved for you." So this dude's so focused on getting the gospel out the correct way, so it's preserved for you, generations, hell in the future. He's preserving the gospel for you and not getting thrown off by anything that they can throw at him for you, for me, for the word. Like, that's focus and self-discipline. So whatever his motivating force was, which obviously was God, was driving him to a point of focus where nothing could bother him. And I think that's pretty cool. Going on to number 6, this is also a cool verse. Is like, God does not show favoritism. Now, I had to pause here because I thought every time I've been raised and gone to church, people are like, oh, the favor of God. Oh, you got the favor of God. And I'm like, okay, what's up? All right, God, now what's up? But looking at the Bible now, it says God does not show favoritism, and I wanted to confirm that, so I looked it up into other sources, and I found in Romans 2:11 it says, "For God does not show favoritism." Again, dang, okay. And then in Acts 10:34 it says, "I now truly understand that God does not show favoritism." What exactly does that mean? I had to break it down. So what I think it means is, like, no matter who you are, God's love is for you. And if you are operating in the love of God, you have his favor. So that, I got that breakdown because I did a little bit of research, and I found Proverbs 3 verse 4. And that helped me to understand why God doesn't show favoritism. Because if you're operating in the love of God, then I'm saying that he's favoring you because his favor is for everybody. But that makes sense. So going on to number 7, Paul's preaching to the uncircumcised. Peter was preaching to the circumcised. So Simon Peter, we're talking about Cephas, the rock. Paul was preaching basically to the Gentiles. That's what they mean by the uncircumcised. Uncircumcised basically because they didn't follow the customs of the Jews. So they're Gentiles. And Paul's talking straight to them while Peter's handling the other ones. Now, when it comes to this preaching thing, there's a group of dudes called the Pillars. And these are like the top-notch disciples. These are the ish guys, yeah. Like James, Simon Peter, which is the Rock, John. They were referred to as the Pillars because there was the real deal dudes, like top-notch dudes, like blue check verified dudes. Now they folk with Peter because they recognized his grace that God had given him. They liked Peter. They liked Paul rather. I'm sorry. They seen the grace that God had given to him after what Paul had come from, and so they really liked him, and they recognized that God, wanted to use him. So the Pillars were cool with Paul, and they were cool with Barnabas and Paul preaching to the Gentiles, as long as they remembered the poor. That was their one stipulation that they had. As long as you can remember the poor, you're good. And so they let them preach. Now going into verse 11, it just talks about where Cephas, the Rock, Simon Peter, he stopped eating and fraternizing with the Gentiles because he feared the uncircumcised group. So he feared the Gentiles. Basically, he got so lost in the sauce, and while he was preaching to the Judaizers, to the circumcised group, he got so lost in the sauce that he, started acting in their ways, and he just stopped eating and fraternizing with Gentiles. He was like, "Nah, man, it's not the way." Even Barnabas, who originally was preaching with Paul, got led astray. Now this really pissed Paul off, and so he actually goes and confronts the Rock in verses 14 through 17. He's like, "How is it that you force the Gentiles to follow the Jewish customs? A person is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith in Jesus Christ. By the works of the law, no one will be justified." And that's powerful because Paul, you got to remember, he's not a pillar, but he's talking to one of the pillars. Like, yo, even you are being led astray right now. What you're doing is not getting you saved. In 17 through 20, they actually go in a little bit more in detail on that. He's like, in trying to be justified in Christ, if we find ourselves among the sinners, does that mean Christ promotes sins? And of course, absolutely not. You know what I'm saying? 19 goes, through the law I died to the law so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved and gave himself for me. So basically they're saying all that law shit, that's out the window because Christ died. And now since Christ died, all the laws died with Christ on the cross. So if you can't remember that principle, then you're being led astray. And that's what he's trying to tell the Rock. He's like, yo, dude, you are being led away. You're doing it wrong. This is not how Christ intended it. And so just because you're chilling with sinners and you find yourself fraternizing with sinners doesn't mean Christ promotes sin. Nah, it's just like maybe you're the light in that dark. Maybe you got to bring them people up or talk God's message to somebody who's never heard it. Maybe that's what that is. But it goes on to verse 21, and it says, I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. And that's a real that's a real statement. If you could gain righteousness and salvation by observing the laws, like paying your tithes, going to church on Sunday, then literally Christ died for nothing, because Christ gave his whole life as a sacrifice so that it's not that hard. All you have to do is believe in him. You don't have to do all this extra. But that's literally what they're trying to say. I mean, it's not bad to do the extra. You go for it. Do the extra mile if you can. But just remember the core principle is just loving and trusting Christ. And once you can do that, you know what I'm saying, you're saved. But that's chapter 2 breakdown. Thank you for joining me on chapter 2. Again, hopefully you like it. Hopefully you're gaining something from this. Hopefully I'm speaking to somebody who needs to hear it. But like, subscribe, share it. And other than that, catch me in maybe later on today I'll let out the chapter 3 breakdown. But yeah, catch me on the next video. And always remember, you got that God power.
Loving the God power. I got the God power.
Tapping the source, caught in the vibes. I just thank God I'm alive. I just thank God that I'm fly. I just thank God for my rhymes every night.